in Britain, it's just completely standard that any media that presents any argument about trans people will just call anyone who's opposed to trans rights a feminist, even if they themselves have explicitly said they're anti-feminist. Like one of the
like Sargon of
people...
Akkad, Carl Benjamin.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, might as well. Like Posey Parker or Kelly J. Keen's one of our biggest exports, and you might have heard of her, like touring around the world and doing all these hate speech talks and stuff. And they still say, "Oh, feminists have concerns," and she's like doing a show in front of thousands of people saying, "I'm not a feminist. I don't just have concerns. I want to take trans people's rights away." And this is like, I feel like people must be going out of their way to maintain this narrative because they've decided it's good for clicks, or they themselves are gender critical and interested in repealing trans rights. And
it's all the above, and they always have this desire to show every issue from two sides, even when there isn't two sides. And like the media has always done this and try to play like, oh, we're just being neutral. No, you're ignoring the objective reality of what is happening to trans people. That's what you're actually doing.
And the consensus
you're not
of the scientific community.
Yes,
right.
Like it and they treat it. This is the same shit that they would do with climate change for years, where it's like, oh, climate scientists say this, but then there's the other side who doesn't think this is a big deal. Like it's just 3%. It's just so dishonest.
Scientists,
right? Yeah. I was really curious. I wanted to ask Katie about this because I was watching a video from Cavernacle. Excuse me. Shout out to him, who's a British content creator, and he was talking about the massive transphobia in the UK, and he said that Labour was basically so far behind the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party is actually good compared to Labour, which it's striking to me as an American because the Democratic, not necessarily just the Democratic Party, but when it comes to these types of social issues and social justice causes, I feel like the US has always been behind Canada as well, but the UK, like when it comes to abortion, when it comes to gay rights, but on this issue of trans rights, they're so far behind. Why do you think that is? Can you talk to that and maybe like the media climate? Because I know it's toxic, but like just to give US viewers a bit of a sense of how bad it is.
Yeah, I mean, the UK has this weird kind of... I mean, we've kind of been doing the mainstreaming transphobia thing for a few more years than you guys. We had the Conservative government in charge in 2016 announced they were going to reform our Gender Recognition Act. You don't need to know the details. But at that point, the UK, there's this like index rating by major LGBT charities in Europe. And the UK was ranked like number one or one of the top countries in Europe in terms of LGBT rights. And since then, we've dropped to like 13th or 14th. And, things are just getting worse here. I mean, that is also due to other countries overtaking us, but also because of the like extreme anti-trans media and attacks from politicians. But since the announcement of this act, basically the entire British media from left to right has just gone in, not just like just asking questions, showing a balance, but just constantly publishing anti-trans propaganda. And I mean, I think there's a few reasons why that is, and it's sort of a complicated web. But I think at least one of the main differences between the UK and, say, the US, for example, is all of the media here is so like incestuous and interlinked. Like, you get these people who write at these, the far right newspapers or on our crappy far right news channels and stuff, and they like used to work at the left wing places, or they all attend the same dinners. They all live in London. They all in the same like little cliques and stuff, and there are just no trans people working for them at all. So I think that...
But they switch sides politically? Like they'll work for like a left-wing paper than a right-wing paper?
Well, we don't really have left-wing papers. I mean, we've got like...
Center-right too.
Yeah, we really don't either. I don't know what Lance... I don't think up in Canada. But here in the US, we don't
get... Democracy Now! In the US is the closest I'd say. Democracy Now! Probably.
I don't know if you saw like the Guardian US actually wrote a letter condemning the Guardian UK's transphobia a few years ago. Which is I think it's quite a big deal.
Based US Guardian.
Your own.
Yeah, that's good.
And they're right.
How much of this is also due to, and I hate to give this one person so much credit, and I'm sort of half joking, half not, how much of this is because of J.K. Rowling?
Well, I mean, she's like unlimited funds. She's still regrettably well respected. And she has absolutely lost her mind to this. So, I mean, obviously she's posting in tweets that she will fund people's legal defenses and help them out with, flights to tour places and stuff. So, I mean, she's obviously spending a lot of money on this, and spending a lot of time on this, and her reputation and her resources and stuff. I mean, I feel like she helped sort of super mainstream it here.
No, globally as well. She's such a revered figure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And also another big difference, I think, is, and again, sorry to just kind of compare UK and US and less so like Canada and stuff, but in the USA, your homophobes say the F slur, like your transphobes just say they want to wipe trans people out. They don't give a fuck. People in the USA say what they think, and it's terrifying when you see them saying we should eliminate trans people and stuff. In the UK, we have people with exactly the same views, but people don't talk like that. When you want to eradicate trans people,
not proper British.
You say like I'm a centrist, and I have just mild concerns about the way things are headed for children who are being manipulated by people
like Anna
with
Kasparian.
It's exactly. It's this kind of wrapping your bigotry and sounding reasonable, and that's the core part of British politics. Is however extreme your views are, you have to present them in the most kind of like restrained, conserved sort of way. So you never say like, "Oh, gay people are destroying the family, and we must get rid of gay marriage." You just say like, "Oh, I just have concerns that what we're teaching children in schools about homosexuality is," and what you're doing is presenting the same thing, and people understand it that way. But it does just sell better if you're
absolutely
a concern. If you're just a person who doesn't really pay attention to politics and you don't really care, and then you see someone like what's his face the other day, or like someone like Matt Walsh. If you're a random British person who doesn't care about politics, and you see Matt Walsh saying things like, "We must stop this child mutilation. We must eliminate trans people." Here, for most British people, you'd be like, "Oh, this guy seems crazy. Like, I'm not interested." Whatever. When you see J.K. Rowling saying, like, "I respect trans people a lot, and I would march with them if they were truly discriminated, but I'm concerned about the numbers of autistic girls who are believing that they are trans-identified." Like, you're like,
oh my god,
fair enough. Like, I like
more insidious,
and people just buy into it, and they aren't going to listen to trans people. The British media is never going to give us a chance to actually explain what she's actually saying and why these views are garbage and stuff.
I think long term that's going to make it so much more potent because they give themselves this plausible deniability that cloaks everything they're saying in legitimacy, right? So it kind of like people are more inclined, I think, to let their guard down and listen. And that's really frustrating. Like even I think it was this year, James Stephanie Sterling, they're a video game content creator, but they talk about like capitalism, transphobia, stuff like that, where they had to break it down why J.K. Rowling is specifically transphobic. And they went through each and every single, like all the receipts and whatnot. And I checked the comments, and
there's an amazing article on that.
Still some denial. Oh, do you?
A full article on all the reasons why she's transphobic. Breaking
that's
down
great.
Piece by piece on her Substack. Yeah.
That's a great resource. I still get it. Like I did a video about J.K. Rowling using one of my tweets to prove how unreasonable trans activists are because I tweeted transphobic trash. Go fuck yourself, something like that. And even you remember? Yeah, it was. I got.
I think that's why I followed you.
Oh, not very cool. Very cool. So it was a positive thing. But even like in my comment section, as I explained how she's transphobic and how she was propping up, I believe my response was to her using like this conversion therapist. Anyway, like the comments were like, how is she transphobic? And it's so frustrating.
Only one thing that she said that's transphobic. Right. Just one. We're using her own words, not your own interpretation.
It's infuriating to me. So I'm glad that you're pointing this out because it's so validating because these people are cloaking what they're hiding the ball, and it really helps them, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going to take people a while to recognize their language that they're using, and what it actually means. Like, because they really do go out of their way to speak in dog whistles, like almost exclusively. like when they say we want to retain single sex spaces and sex based rights. I mean, most people, if you just teleported here from like 2010, pretty much anyone listening to this would just be like, yeah, I mean, that sounds good, right? We want women to have rights. I mean, but you don't know that when they say single sex, they don't actually mean single sex. They mean specifically cis people. And that's like and to explain that to just a random member of the public, like, oh, by the way, yeah, and the word cis means non-trans, and when they say single sex, they actually did, and it's like there's all these new categories you have to introduce to them, and then they'll just be like, nah, because she says she supports trans rights, so
that is so infuriating to me. One thing that I'm seeing more and more of, and I'm convinced this is astroturfed here, is there is this attempt to sow division within the LGBTQ plus community, like the LGB without the T's. And I don't think that that's sticking here. I mean, we have conservative gays who are dipshits that are anti-trans. I think because they're trying to like throw trans people under the bus to save themselves. But then you have like, even within that, you have Blair White, for example, trying to throw non-binary people under the bus to save. Like it's just kind of like this game of no, them first. Is that something that's common in the UK too, where you see this attempt to divide? And how is it sticking within like
the LGBT alliance?
We pioneered this stuff. Like, I feel like you know, you guys over there are like 3 years behind us. With all of the stuff. Yeah, so we've got this. I mean, we've had several of these groups, and I think you know, there's a number of gender critical groups, and they originally started off by doing this kind of feminists versus LGBT people, or feminists versus trans people specifically, and creating this fake you know, battle between women and trans people, and that sold really well in the media. And I think they realized and were like, we can just do this again with other groups. So they come up with LGBT Alliance, and that's what they are. They're like, oh, it's gay, you know, gay people and trans people are fundamentally opposed, and like they've done loads of different versions of it. Today I actually saw one which was autistic people against gender ideology, and they're just trying to create a new group which is opposed to that. But yeah, specifically inside the LGBT community, it's they push quite hard on that. And the amount of, I mean, I do a lot of sort of warring in the trenches on Twitter, and the amount of straight people who are like, actually, lesbians have said no. You like trans people, and it's
I speak for the lesbians.
If you believed it, I mean, if you were to just read, if you were a straight person who doesn't have any gay friends, and you were to read the British media, or you go on Twitter and see what the gender critical movement is saying, you'd be like, wow, okay, lesbians have a real issue with trans people. And then if you look at the polls, cis lesbians are the most supportive group of cis people, the most supportive demographic for trans people, you know, of cis people. And it's just totally turned upside down. But this narrative, they really managed to get it to stick. Like when you go on news shows, or, you know, you talk to radio people or whatever, they sometimes ask you like, oh yeah, but what about lesbians? And then you have to say, oh, but lesbians are the most supportive people. And then
did you ever see that thing that Graham Linehan did, where all of a sudden he was pretending? Oh no, we put on this costume, and then he joined a dating app for lesbians to try and prove that like they're as transphobic as he is, and then do this whole thing where it's like, yeah, look, I made an account, I'm she, her, all this kind of stuff. And it was like, this is like a 50 or 60, I don't know how old he is, anyways, dude. And then he's like he's like putting on Maine and broadcasting how he's going on a dating app trying to pick up like 18-year-olds. It's so creepy.
He did that, and then a little while later, some other gender critical men did it, and they were posting like, oh, you know, because when Graham Linehan did it, he went on and he found some like a couple of trans women who were on this app, and then posted their profile pictures to shame them, or people he thought were trans women anyway. And then so some of the like, you know, lesser grade B gender critical men did the same things, and genuinely some of them, because they all signed up at a similar time, some of them found each other's profiles and posted it. I'm like, look at this man on it.
Oh my God.
Like, it's incredible. Like,
how embarrassing.
Wow. They were like catfishing each other for their own stupid ideology, and then getting so angry about it.
Yeah, and everyone's so surprised that they're all getting divorced. It's just like, look, Crowder, Linehan, Elon Musk. Like, why are our wives leaving us when we're just obsessed over this one thing?
It's a new like archetype, isn't it? It's the sort of middle-aged man who absolutely loses their mind over trans people.
Yes.
Divorced, and then ruins their finances. That seems to be.
I love how Graham does interviews where he's like, they took everything from me. They took everything. I'm like, no, they didn't. This is a you problem, you weirdo. No one took shit from you.
He's never gonna change. But just on this LGBT Alliance thing, I don't know if you saw, probably not, but so LGBT Alliance are actually a registered charity in the UK, and I don't know what the rules are in other countries.
Mermaids lost theirs. Oh,
yeah.
Fuck.
So the UK has some charity commission, and you're only a charity if they approve you to be a charity, and then there's extra level. They have to check your finances, and they also have to check that you are doing charitable things. And LGBT Alliance just aren't. I mean, just straightforwardly, they're not doing anything apart from campaigning against trans people's rights. And so the Mermaids, which is a pro-trans charity, basically took them to court, or took the Charity Commission to court. They did some UK court rubbish to try and get their charity status removed. And today they announced that they weren't going to change anything. And they didn't lose in court, really. They just said Mermaids didn't have the legal standing in order to bring this case in the first place. It was like dismissed before it went to trial. But the Charity Commission then released a statement, and they were like, well, as long as everyone treats everyone else with respect, then it's okay. And it's like literally the foundation of gender critical ideology. What LGBT Alliance, how they formed, is a total disrespect for trans people. Like, that's nothing they do has respect in any sense.
Yeah, they're a hate group.
But it doesn't matter because they present themselves in a kind of
politely
moderate way, just showing they have concerns, never raising their voice, never swearing, and that works in British politics.
Wow, that dynamic is really interesting.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, there is some of that in the U.S. as well. Like whenever people are a lot of politics around like freaking out about certain things is pointing out, oh, this person, look at these people protesting, look how rude they're being. There is some of that. It carries through. Like, there's, for whatever reason, I mean, I guess you can kind of assume why, when people are polite with their bigotry, it's easier for the masses to consume and be fooled by it. Whereas if it's like, overt, it's definitely there's still like a massive audience for that. I mean, look at people like, as you mentioned, Matt Walsh, they still have massive audiences. But in terms of actually convincing people, there is something to the idea of, if you do it politely, it's just going to be more effective. And it's hard to combat that shit.
I mean, you had Anita Bryan, and she did that, didn't she? Like campaigning against gay rights in whenever it was, the 70s.
True.
She did exactly that. It's kind of this concerned Christian mothers, politely. And when I don't know if you've seen that thing where she gets hit in the face by the pie, and then the immediate response is to just pray for the person who's just thrown a pie at her. And like, that kind of, we're just normal people just trying to get our views across. So sure, US has it.
To David's point, though, there's also like, if there's an entry point that the right wants, they're using wedge issues. Like, they'll talk about how, hey, by the way, the science is kind of out on puberty blockers. It's still not FDA approved for trans people. It is for cis people. Bathrooms, jails and prisons, professional sports. These are all where they can find and create what they call the debate. Right? That's how they always respond to this. You'll see like the Daily Wire be like, we're just trying to have the debate, and on the other end, it's like, well, no, this is basically one side trying to have civil rights, and then on the other side you're trying to prevent that by having the debate, right?
It's amazing how well this works. Like, I think particularly for like older straight cis men, not to stereotype too hard or anything, but if sometimes they'll say things, they'll say this horrible stuff to me, and then they'll come in my DMs and we'll talk a bit. Like, do you genuinely want to like ban me from the toilets at work? Like, that's what the people you're supporting here are campaigning for, and that is a thing that the UK government is genuinely discussing. Like, do you actually want that? And they're like, but what about this teenager in America who won at track and field and dominated all the other girls in sport? What about UFC? Like, Fallon Fox cracked a woman's skull. And I'm like, what? We're not talking about sport. I'm talking about my ability to like live and exist in everyday life. And then they're like, yeah, but what about winning weight in the Olympics and stuff? And people really do just see trans people as like one issue, like a single thing. And then they see something like a trans woman who raped someone being put into a women's prison, even if that didn't actually happen or not, they see that, and then that is trans rights to them. And it's either usually prisons or particularly sport. That's what seems that's really worked really well for hooking these kind of like straight cis men. They imagine, oh well, if I was put in a UFC ring with a random woman, I would destroy her because I'm big and strong, even if I was wearing a dress. Therefore, we should take away trans people's rights. And I think, having it compounded into one issue has really worked for the like anti-LGBT crew. So yeah, certainly trans people as a wedge issue is a kind of a separate thing, but they'll try and just merge it in, and then it would be anti-LGBT. If you support LGBT people, then that means you support Fallon Fox breaking the skull of a woman in a cage match. Yeah, and it seems to work on people.